Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. If you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. Right, today it's a subject that we actually haven't covered in quite some time. Obviously I started this channel after the big event of the Brexit referendum actually happened. I obviously brought it up every now and then because there was a big back and forth between the years of 2016 and 2019 about how Brexit was going to be done. It was done, and basically everyone's shut up about it since, more or less, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. The Tories definitely should have ridden the wave of the great things that could have been done post-Brexit, but unfortunately they were quite lazy, and to be fair, they were very distracted by COVID as well with their time in office, though we are still waiting on this big regulation bonfire of EU regulation that never happened, that mainly didn't happen because they changed the legislation at the last minute to go from anything we've not mentioned needs to go to anything we've not mentioned needs to stay. So we ended up keeping most of the red tape. That's at least is what I've been told by an ex-minister, because Haryan has a lot of sources these days, as it turns out. Anyway, this is a video all about how, pretty obviously via the back door, this government does want us back in the customs union and thereby getting back into the EU, because you can't be in the customs union without being part of the EU. The countries that are in the European Economic Area, such as Norway, they're obviously in the EEA, they have close ties with the single market, they have free movement within Europe, but they aren't part of the customs union, because if you're part of the customs union, you then have to be an EU member state, which Norway don't want to be, and neither does any of the other countries like Switzerland. But despite that, the ministers that we have at the moment are not very good at hiding this fact. David Lammy suggests the UK would benefit from rejoining an EU customs union, but Keir Starmer, responding to his deputy's intervention, stresses the government wants to strengthen its ties with Europe without a customs union, i.e. be more like Norway, which, to be fair, actually was an argument for Brexit. You can actually be outside the customs union and EU while getting a lot of the benefits, but obviously the EU is trying to punish us for leaving, because if it was successful, then obviously you'd get other countries wanting to leave, and they did not want that. So the Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy has suggested it could be beneficial for the UK to consider re-entering a customs union with the EU, which was half the reason for leaving the EU, because we wanted to set our own tariff policy. This was the whole sovereignty argument. We got it back, and instantly Labour want to give it away, like they want to give everything away to international institutions. He said that although doing so was not the government's current policy, he could see how the country outside the EU had benefited from such arrangements. Other countries outside the EU had benefited from such arrangements. Such as which countries? I'm not aware of any countries that are outside the EU but part of the customs union, so please do give us an example, sir. It is self-evident that leaving the EU badly damaged our economy, took us out of an important marketplace and created serious friction. That untruths were being peddled by those that thought exiting the EU would be a good thing, Mr. Lammy told the Newsagents podcast. There's been so many arguments over this, I just can't be bothered to properly go through it anymore. No, the problem with leaving the European Union was not the fact that it was always going to be bad. The problem was that we had awful negotiators till we had Boris Johnson, and then COVID happened. And while all that was happening, we didn't have the big Brexit bonfire, blah blah blah. You know what the arguments are by this point. But Lammy gives the game away. That's why every single day I was Foreign Secretary, I returned to the subject of our relationship with the EU. Asked repeatedly if he would like to see the UK in a customs union, he said, "It's not current policy, that's not currently where you are, but you can see countries like Turkey with a customs union seemingly benefiting and seeing growth in their economy, and again, that's self-evident." Turkey is a unique case. It's not in the EU customs union. They are basically in their own customs union outside the EU customs union, where they've basically made a trade deal. But again, you can make trade deals without being in any sort of customs union, let alone being within the EU customs union. The Prime Minister's economic advisor, Minosh Safik, has also reportedly advocated behind the scenes for joining a customs union. I suppose this is the main point we need to see with Labour. They are advocating joining a customs union while trying to avoid actually joining the EU. That is a way, in Turkey's case anyway, you can avoid this. And these comments were being taken as the clearest indication that the government is considering bringing the UK further back in line with the EU, which is obviously making Brexiteers a bit mad, hence I am making this video. But Starmer was asked to respond and say why he was not advocating for membership of the EU, given the growth is an ongoing priority for the government, because the rest of the EU is growing a lot less quick than Britain, believe it or not. He was quick to dampen down the speculation. The PM said Labour will be sticking to its manifesto, which pledged to deepen ties with the EU without returning to the customs union, single market or freedom of movement. Because yesterday, Liberal Democrat MP Al Pinkerton was introducing a 10-minute bill that calls for an UK-EU customs union. It's time for the Labour MPs to back our bill and help turbocharge our economy. So this is all part of the game. They know you can't rejoin the EU because you can't really overturn the 2016 vote, especially when, let's be real, it's not been implemented to the full extent. Obviously, we're out of the EU. That is a good thing, but absolutely nobody is happy with the results of it because effectively we've not really changed the way the country works since leaving the EU, which everyone was calling for. Labour and Lib Dems and some Tories say this shows that it was a failure, we may as well go back in. They tried arguing that for years, didn't happen, Boris Johnson got in, so they had to change tact. Oh, you know, Brexit's been an absolute disaster for the economy. No, even The Guardian was saying that's not true. I went through it and I'm laughing at The Guardian some time ago. So what do you do next? Oh, well, let's join the customs union at least. No, you can't do that because you have to be part of the EU to join the customs union. So this is the next step. Well, can we at least make a new customs union with the EU, where we're technically outside their customs union and the EU, but we have a deal like Turkey, as Lammy said, where you have an agreement effectively over shared tariffs, etc, etc, etc. Now, this is still within the sovereignty argument, you could argue, but then they're eventually going to say, oh, well, we've already got a customs union with them, why not join the actual thing? And then it goes on to, oh, well, to do that, you have to rejoin the EU. Oh, well, look how good this customs union's going. We may as well join it back up completely. All this comes down to, every time, as always comes into conversation when Brexit ever comes up, is these people just want to get through the passport gates quicker because they're all middle class and go on about 3 holidays abroad a year. That's what this mainly comes down to. And I'm not even joking. Over all the years I've talked to people about Brexit, that is the common thing that comes up because it's the only thing really directly affecting people. The funniest part is the EU, individual states, have sovereignty over who they let through the passport gates, and they put a load of the English into the slow one, into the one with the rest of the world, because ultimately they're still trying to punish us. And the government didn't make deals that included that. It was absolutely ridiculous. And obviously there are trade-offs to being in and outside the EU, but the thing is, the absolute killer shot is, which EU country is seeing massive growth? The answer's none of them. So being in the customs union isn't even going to help that much. You know, Starmer and Rachel Reeves keep saying, oh, we're like second fastest growing country in the G7. Yeah, that's because a lot of Europe is basically going into recession. Japan ain't great. Canada's not that much better. It's only really the US that's growing. And guess what? They're not in the EU. So when this vote went forward, Labour MPs were whipped into abstaining, but 13 of them still defied the whips and voted in favour of the UK rejoining a customs union with the European Union. The group, which included Dame Meg Hillier, the influential chair of the Treasury Select Committee, backed by the Lib Dem motion in the Commons despite calls from party managers to abstain from the vote. As a result, the Lib Dems' 10-minute rules bill passed the Commons with a majority of 1 after the Deputy Speaker cast the deciding vote in its favour. They don't mention who the Deputy Speaker was for some reason, but it was Caroline Noakes, who, just so you know, is a Tory MP. And it was the only Tory MP, but apparently she was doing it in her capacity as a Deputy Speaker. Now, it may be a lay opinion here, but in my opinion, the Speaker or Deputy Speaker, whoever is casting the deciding vote, probably should vote more for the status quo than against the status quo, which in the case of Brexit is staying out of a customs union. But this basically brings us back to the whole dinner parties argument. What would people say at dinner parties? Well, they'd have a go at her for basically making Brexit the disaster that is Brexit. They'd say, carry on as it is, which is unfortunate. If it makes you feel better, though, 10-minute rule bills basically go nowhere, even if they pass, because they largely need the majority of the House, a vast majority, to actually get anywhere. what a 10-minute rule bill actually is that any MP puts forward legislation that they then have 10 minutes to make the case for in Parliament, and then another MP has 10 minutes to debate against, and then a vote is put on that piece of legislation, and it's a vote to see if it can go through to a second reading. So this doesn't even mean that it's going to become law. It's quite unlikely to become law. I think as time goes on, Labour is going to be whipped into having to vote against this because betrayal of Brexit and all that. So it's not likely to go anywhere. I mean, 10-minute rule bills happen all the time. Rupert Lowe, I know, puts quite a few through, but they're never voted for. Farage put one through the other week. That was voted against, of course, as well, which is what's frustrating Reform, Lowe, and, well, other people about this. One left-wing 10-minute rule bill goes through, easy. Any sort of right-wing one, whether it be about quantitative easing or getting out of the ECHR, instantly voted against. And in this case, even the Speaker, who, as I say, in theory should probably be voting for the status quo, voted instead in favour of the Lib Dems because, well, political class is very left-wing, who would have thought, and very, very Europhilic. Anyway, a Labour source said that the rebels would not be punished as the instruction to abstain was only advisory, and while the vote is not binding, the Labour rebellion is further embarrassment to Downing Street after the Deputy Prime Minister Lammy suggested last week he's in favour of a change in approach towards rejoining a customs union, and we've been through all that. Despite Starmer saying that we're not going to be joining a customs union, a growing number of influential figures in the party are calling for a rethink amid concerns that government's current reset will not significantly increase economic growth. Studies have estimated that UK GDP is about 4% less than it would have been if Britain had remained within the customs union and single market. Okay, I want to see those studies. In contrast, Starmer's reset with the EU, which should reduce trade friction at the border, is expected to increase GDP by only about 0.3%. And, you know, the EU is going to want things with a custom union for us. Again, their default perception is the UK needs to be punished for leaving. Some ministers and MPs are privately calling on the Prime Minister to commit to rejoining a customs union with the EU as part of the party's manifesto going into the next election. God please do. That's going to completely kneecap your support. Baroness Misho Shafik, Starmer's new economic advisor, even suggested bringing it forward as a potential growth measure in the budget. The UK-EU Customs Union duty to negotiate bill was tabled by Al Pinkerton, the Lib Dems, Europe spokesman, and as a so-called 10 minutes rule bill. It ended in a surprise tie of 100 to 100, giving the Deputy Speaker the casting vote in which she backed the bill in line with convention. And again, I don't know why the casting vote would be on the side of in favour. I don't know why it wouldn't be against as default. But, well, there you go. Anyway, Davey took this as a historic victory. Across the country, people are crying out for real change and a solution to the cost of living crisis, he said. And you think rejoining the EU and growing the economy by 0.3%, and that's before we even know what the EU want from this, is going to help. Okay. A customs union with the EU is the single biggest step the government could take to grow an economy. That's not true. Sort the energy sector out would be the easiest way to do it. Put money back into people's pockets and generate billions for our public services, he said. I suppose 0.3% of the economy is actually billions, but it's absolutely not going to happen because it would all be eaten up by bennies. The Prime Minister must now listen to Parliament and the public, drop his... You won by a vote, dude. Drop his self-imposed red lines and finally go for proper growth through an ambitious trade deal with the EU. This is all the Lib Dems are, by the way. Rejoin the EU, hate Farage and hate Trump. That's it. It's amazing that they are even as popular as they are. But then again, the Greens are coming second in some polls, so I probably shouldn't be that surprised. Anyway, having said all this, Labour is still portraying Brexit even without joining a customs union. The UK could allow in 40,000 EU citizens under Youth Mobility Scheme. Net migration would be unaffected, however, according to a study that shows more young Britons left the UK as part of existing schemes than came the other way. Which, well, given migration figures recently, that is not going to help with the whole we're being replaced argument, given that a lot of British nationals are leaving, and a lot of foreigners are coming in. And again, as I keep saying, I know an awful lot of people around my age who have let's leave the country as a backup plan because they just don't see the point of being aspirational here. So ministers could allow more than 40,000 European citizens into Britain as part of a youth mobility scheme without increasing net migration, research suggests, before talks in Brussels on Starmer's EU reset. A study by the UK Trade and Business Commission found that 44,000 more young Brits left the UK as part of the Youth Mobility Scheme, with Australia, New Zealand and Canada then came the other way. This, the Commission said, would give the Home Office significant visa headroom for a European Youth Mobility Scheme without breaching the government's pledge to bring down net migration. Oh, incredible. Yeah, I think we're less than a year away from reform just switching from net migration to gross migration and shifting the conversation that way, which it really needs to go. Because ultimately, I mean, to be fair, with Australia, New Zealand and Canada, you know, I've said this forever, definitely good countries to be in some sort of union with this in, because we share a common language, we even share cultural ties, given that all of those countries obviously originate from a British diaspora, and our economies are largely the same. I am fully in favour of Kanzuk, but I'm only in favour of Kanzuk if all these countries sort immigration out from outside of Kanzuk. Europe, little bit different, not got a common language. There are some cultural ties, obviously there's big history there. I would probably be less against this if it wasn't so symbolic about slowly having more ties with the EU. But in isolation and principle, I don't necessarily have anything against this, but it is not helping with the brain drain that Britain is currently enduring, and trust me, it will endure over the next few years. It would also be the most generous of all youth mobility schemes in operation between UK and other countries. That makes sense with the EU, it's the largest bloc out of all these other countries. Given as examples, Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Europe Minister, is preparing to travel to Brussels to talk with his European counterpart, Markos Sefcovic. Officials from both sides have been conducting negotiations about the technical detail of Starmer's reset for weeks, but this will be the first time that they have been held at a political level. Again, the whole idea of an EU reset, what exactly does that mean? Are we going to be joining the EU again? It's all up in the air. It all doesn't look great. At least Starmer's trying to stay on message that he doesn't want to join the customs union or, God forbid, rejoin the EU. However, it's clear everyone around him is influencing in one particular way, and it's not the Brexit way. Anyway, another example of Starmer actually wanting closer ties with the EU to the eventual point they may as well just say, oh, let's just rejoin. He's called on European leaders to urgently curb joint human rights laws so that member states can take tougher action to protect their borders and see off the rise of the populist right across the continent. For a crucial European summit on Wednesday, the Prime Minister urged fellow members to go further in modernising interpretations of the ECHR to prevent asylum seekers using it to avoid deportation. Looks like that human rights law isn't the be-and and end-all after all, Mr Starmer, or Sir Keir. But Labour has been condemned for calling for changes, with human rights campaigners, Labour peers and some MPs arguing it could open the door to countries abandoning some of the world's most vulnerable people. Yes, of course. We've had 3 separate stories this week of Afghan migrants, I think all of them actually were asylum seekers, but don't quote me on that, who have been in court and prosecuted for rapes against girls in Britain. One as young as 15 years old. And she actually recorded the incident on her phone, but that evidence has been, it's not leaked. And the reason they don't want it anywhere close to the public is because it apparently could incite riots. And yet here we are having people who basically want to ignore all this because you might get the odd person who actually did suffer war coming in over on a boat. I sincerely hope that this is the legacy of the elites in Britain from 2000s, mid-2000s to 2030, where they saw themselves as arbiters of international justice, allowed millions upon millions of people who hate Britain, England, Scotland and the rest of it to come into the country, helped cover up horrific crimes that they were doing in terms of rape gangs, grooming gangs, what have you, and when it became all too much, they still tried to play into the denial. There needs to be a complete reset on who the elites are in Britain, and unfortunately the only power you actually have to do anything about that is, frankly, vote Reform. That's the only way you can do it. And if you're asking what more can you do, join Reform, go to your local branch, throw out leaflets. That is infinitely more useful than anything literally anyone does on social media. So hopefully, earliest 2027, I'm still hoping that we have an election by then, things will markedly improve, and pretty much overnight, by the way, as well. I have that much trust in Reform, and hey, if it doesn't work out perfectly, as I say, we've all got a backup plan to leave. Right, I think with that, that's everything we had for today. So, Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy what I do, please do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a channel member and leave super chats, super thanks. In terms of streaming this week, tonight it is the gaming stream, Deus Ex Human Revolution at 9 o'clock. Friday, we have Wolves of Westminster that will be released at 5, and I will remember to release it at 5. I will also be over on Crime Guy's channel having a little quiz about Chris Chan. And then I won't make any more promises about Laughing at the Guardian this week because I don't know if I'll have time, but I will certainly try to do it. Right, I think with that, that's everything we had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.